Welcome to the Academy, where we discuss and seek a change in long-term athletic development. My name is Ben Wellenbach, and I am the dad of two girls, strength coach and owner of Be Well Fitness. It is my desire to help educate and shift the way our current culture operates regarding long-term athletic development. I was about 2 years into owning my own facility, and I liken it to speeding in a car looking backwards. And I had a love of training, a love of coaching, and a desire to genuinely help people. My first mentor, Mike Boyle, had created a website forum for other strength coaches to discuss and share information, and I was thirsty for it. This was my first introduction to our guest today, Sean Skahan. Not only was he putting out articles that were both intriguing and helpful, he was also the strength coach to a teammate of mine from prep school, then Anaheim Duck. He was writing about coaching injured athletes, in-season training, recovery methods. He was basically giving his playbook for keeping athletes durable and playing. I don't think I knew it at the time, but he was writing the playbook for long-term athletic development. And as I do with every guest on this podcast, I will pair each guest with a sneaker from the Nike collection that best represents them. Nike introduced the Air Trainer 3 in various colorways, but none spoke to me more for Sean than the USA colorway. Even though we have never met until today, it is evident to me that he has a love of family and a love of coaching. This shoe is versatile for training and style, like he is with coaching and family. And it's an absolute pleasure and honor to have him on the podcast today. So, Coach, welcome and thank you very much for taking the time to share some lessons learned for long-term athletic development.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I got to ask you, who was your teammate that played for the Ducks?
You actually have interviewed him, Coach. It is Joey DePinta.
Oh, yeah. What an awesome human being, huh?
He's exceptional. And actually I saw, well, I haven't seen Joe in maybe 19 maybe 10, 12 years.
Okay.
And I use Joe as an example when I speak in front of many young athletes and even older athletes, because I was fortunate enough, and I know, I'm excited to hear more about you, but I've been fortunate enough to be around some exceptional athletes growing up playing.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 6 guys on my prep school team at Lawrence Academy over the
Okay.
course of my time there that got drafted.
It's awesome.
And Joe was one of the 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say this to bash Joe at all. In fact, I say this because I told even Mike this very thing on the last podcast, that out of the 6, Joe was the only one to make it into the NHL,
Mm-hmm.
truly into the NHL. And out of the 6, he was probably the lowest from a skill standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But from a character and a work ethic standpoint and an integrity standpoint, he was
Yeah.
he was top.
100%. And again, not to bash Joe's hockey playing ability, but I've had that same conversation with people that say, I can't believe Joe won a Stanley Cup. And it's an indication to his character, his work ethic, and not just hockey skills. I mean, he was skilled enough to win a Stanley Cup, but the other attributes that he brought on a daily basis were what allowed him to do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And to me, I believe strength and conditioning sports not only pressure tests your character, but it also reveals it. And Joe was one of very few that, from a character standpoint and work ethic standpoint, always was working.
Hmm.
And, I think that I think it's undervalued and overlooked when it comes to long-term athletic development. We focus so much on skill, you know, how fast can you skate? How accurate is your shot? How hard is your shot? I mean, all of the, goals scored, assists, points, all of these things, right? But I think there's more to the package.
Hmm. I would agree.
So let's start with you, Coach. Just a little bit. Start in the beginning. Where did you grow up? Tell me about brothers, sisters. What were sports like for you when you were younger?
Yeah, I grew up in a town called Quincy, Massachusetts, which is immediately south of Boston, the next town south. And I grew up, I have a younger sister. She's 4 years younger than me. I grew up, I remember playing soccer, t-ball, baseball, and I got into football. I played rec basketball. I grew up in an area where, like, it was kids just went to the park and played until the street lights came on, right? It
Hmm.
was basketball, stickball, which is a sport that not many people know much about. Everything, four squares, touch football, tackle football, and I got into playing football at the Pop Warner level, and then I went into high school and played football. I ended up not playing baseball at the age of 15. I stopped playing baseball. I found baseball too boring. I love football. I absolutely loved it. I was relatively fast. Got to play on a state championship high school football team, and then I went into college and played at UMass Boston, which is Division III. So that was my athletic background.
Nice. And
Hmm.
as you were growing up and playing, what was mom and dad like?
Supportive. That was who was driving me to baseball practices. I was lucky enough that the place where I played football as a youth athlete was 2 blocks from my house, so I could walk in my equipment every day. But yeah, very supportive. And again, they weren't those like helicopter parents where I was free roaming around the park for hours every day. Just, I mean, I guess working on my athletic skills, whether it be basketball or touch football, whatever it was.
Yeah. Did you instinctively have a desire to practice yourself, or uh did was there pressure, like good pressure from parents to go, Sean, get out there, get some practice in?
No, practice was part of the routine. You
Yeah.
had your practice scheduled and you showed up and you worked and you went home.
Yeah. Did you do anything extra outside of practice, or was it just the practice itself?
I mean, depending on the sport. I mean, if of course, baseball, I would play catch, or football, I would throw the ball around. Yeah, I mean, nothing too crazy. I wasn't going to hitting instructions or wasn't going to football camps. No, it was basically just show up and practice, and then it was a lot easier back then, you know.
Yeah. Well, so when you went to UMass Boston,
Hmm.
what was your degree in exercise science and kinesiology? What drove that for you?
Yeah, I sustained a shoulder injury my senior year. I missed some time and ended up playing the last few games. That was in high school, and I ended up having surgery on it. It was a dislocated shoulder. Like I couldn't like put my t-shirt on without it subluxing. It was painful. Got the surgery done, and I got interested in the PT aspect of it. And so I wanted to become an athletic trainer. And at the time at UMass Boston, you had to get like 1,200 hours of work in as an athletic trainer. And I want to say half of them, so 600 hours, had to be with a contact sport. Well, I played the only contact sport offered at UMass Boston. So I started to do the math in my head. I'm like, this is going to take me a long time if I use all my football eligibility and want to do this. So I ended up learning about strength and conditioning as a profession, and to me, after that surgery, I really wanted to get stronger, and I started, researching strength and conditioning programs so I could play competitively at the Division III level, which I was able to accomplish. But I got into the profession because, at the time, UMass Boston had an ACSM curriculum, with the gear towards becoming a health fitness instructor. Well, we were so lucky. We had a professor named Avery Fagenbaum. He's still in the NSCA, and he came to UMass Boston, I want to say for 2 years, which happened to be my junior and senior year. And he brought this, hey, strength and conditioning is a profession, and we can have students studying this, and they can go become strength and conditioning coaches. So I was so lucky to have Dr. Fagenbaum come in at that time, and I just got hooked on the profession. I was probably like an average student, like my freshman and sophomore years, but then like I became a really good student because I was really interested in this stuff. And then I, found out that it could be a profession and something I really wanted to do.
So, I mean, did I mean, I think it's what's so common, at least that I've been finding with everybody that I've been speaking to, is that they've had, an impactful person that has given them either incentive or drive or support or direction as to at least a first initial step. And it sounds like, this professor did that for you.
Yeah, I think so. He got me interested in the profession, but it probably wasn't until, I did my internship my senior year, and we had the options to apply at 4 universities. It was, I want to say, Harvard, Boston College, and Northeastern.
Hmm.
And the fourth was Boston University. And at the time, I was a huge Boston Bruins fan. I remember seeing Cam Neely doing some rehab on the news a lot, and Mike Boyle was a guy that was like getting notoriety in that aspect. I remember seeing like, wow, that's a pretty cool job. Like, guy trains Cam Neely, who was, back then Cam Neely was like the epitome of like the tough guy for the Bruins and a great hockey player. And so I applied to work at Boston University, and Mike had just left to start his own company. I got to work for Glenn Harris, who's still the director of strength and conditioning there, and then got to meet Mike and work for him as part of his summer program at his, it's now MBSC, but it was called something Sports Acceleration North, I want to say it was called back
Yes.
then.
Yes.
And so I started with them then, and yeah, Mike helped me, with reference letters and helping me find opportunities, and he was instrumental as well.
That's awesome to hear. I mean, that kind of answers, or at least starts to answer my next question, which is, if people don't know you already, your really your career has been built around hockey. So, did hockey find you, or did you find hockey? And it kind of sounds like maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I remember at the time working at Mike's place, I remember a lot of the athletes there were hockey players, and every one of them, men and women or boys and girls, were great people. And I
Yeah.
remember that, and I didn't know. I thought for me playing football, I'd be like a college football strength coach, because that was kind of, there were, a lot of universities had strength and conditioning coaches at the time, and football was the main priority, it seemed to me. And so I'd saw myself, on the sideline at a Division I football team or whatever. And then it, it's a good question, because it aligned up hockey, which is crazy. My first I accepted a job as a graduate assistant at the University of Minnesota, where I worked for the then men's athletic department. They had split athletic departments back then. That's how long ago it was.
Wow.
So I worked for the men's athletic department, and I was with men's Olympic sports, and hockey was probably the biggest sport. So I got to work with the University of Minnesota Gopher men's hockey program for about a year and a half, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And then after I graduated, ideally, I wish I could say I want to relocate back to Boston and get that job at, the Patriots or the Bruins or the Celtics or Boston College. And my first job was at the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks. That was my first full-time job after graduating. And have you not, the University of North Dakota has a really good college hockey program. So I was working with them for 1 year. And then I was able to get the job at Boston College working with their hockey program. So I became a hockey guy just because of the fact that I was able to get that graduate assistantship at Minnesota. That's just the one I was able to get. It was very competitive back then to get a G8 position, and I'm very fortunate enough to land there. And then my first full-time job was with a college hockey program. And my next full-time job was I was a director of hockey for the really good, prestigious college hockey program. So next thing you know, I'm a hockey guy in the span of probably 4 years. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And your longest stint, at least to my knowledge, you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but your longest stint was with the Anaheim Mighty Ducks. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I'm not sure the ins and outs of, professional sports, but I have to assume that, as coaches change, they potentially change some of the staff because they want to bring in, quote unquote, their guys. But you stayed for quite a long time, and
Mhm.
you were there with a couple different coaches, right?
Yeah, I was there for 13 years, and it's crazy because there's so much turnover in the NHL. I worked with 3 coaches during that time.
Wow.
I was hired by Mike Babcock, and it was great because they didn't have a really set strength and conditioning program in place there. They had a consultant. I came in there with a college hockey background where it was team orientated. And so we had a small weight room. We were able to redesign the weight room. It's a funny story because we had a leg press machine, we had a leg extension, we had a leg curl, and it was Paul Correa's stuff. Like Paul Correa at the time, Paul was one of the only guys who really worked out, and I remember like making the change in the weight room, and then staff members were like, "Hey, Paul's going to be mad at you for this. Like that's his equipment." And I'm like, "Okay." So I met with Paul, and I told this story on another podcast I was on, and I was kind of nervous because like Paul was Paul was probably making $10 million at the time, and the team payroll was 36. So do the math there.
Yeah.
And so like he had this presence about him that was to me built up in my head that like, okay, I gotta make sure it goes right with this guy. And met Paul, and Paul was the nicest person. And what he said to me was like, yeah, we need the team training. And I said, yeah, Paul, so as a result of that, I had to make some changes. And he's like, okay, let me know what you think. And that was it. And that was, that was all in my head. And next thing you know, we had a team training program in place, and Paul was one of the first guys in every day, and that was awesome.
So, I mean, that to me, he would be a pivotal player for sure.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
is he one of the guys that over your time there stood out to you?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Because we had an unbelievable year that year. We got all the way to game 7 of the Stanley Cup finals and we lost. That was my first season. And I'm like, oh my God. But I'm not going to say the training had everything to do with it, but our guys bought in. Our guys bought into the training process. Our captain, Paul, he played all 82 games that year. And that was a lot of fun. And yeah, I think, when you have a good captain bought into what you're trying to do, you can have a lot of success. And yeah, he's definitely, and there's other guys like Scott Niedermeyer, for example, or Ryan Getzloff, Corey Perry, Andy McDonald, Keith Carney. The list goes on. I had so many hundreds of guys coming in and out of there, and yeah, I was very fortunate.
So out of all of those guys that you listed, and maybe some of the guys that you haven't listed, um, what are similar qualities that kind of stood out for you that made them, maybe they weren't top performers from a point standpoint, but maybe they were top performers from a durability, a teammate standpoint, how they were just in the culture of that team. And I say that because I think one of the important things from a long term athletic development that potentially gets overlooked is, we get focused so much on the result of something. So, the wins, the loss, or, the goals, the assists, and we forget the some of the intangibles. And I think those intangibles to me are what create the long term athletic development.
Hmm. I would say all those guys, professionals, ultimate professionals. They knew when they got to the rink, it was time to work. Now, this is in Orange County. It's what they did away from the rink. I don't know or care, but when they showed up, it was, we're here to work and be professionals and do what it takes to help the team win. And that's one thing that's, I guess, in common with all of them.
So would you say that they were they were on time? They were um, you know curious? Would you say
Mhm.
that, like, they were above and beyond, let's say, what you were even programming? They said, okay, coach, what else can I do? How else can I
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of them wanted to get better. And I think there was a level of trust with me. Like, I can only think, I mean, in pro sports, you're going to have guys who like say, I do this as a program. And I talked to other colleagues about this, and I was like, how do you approach that? And they say, what's your program? But I was kind of like, well, I want to design the program, and that should be my responsibility. But you do have some guys that are like, yeah, I do this program. Probably like two or three out of the thousands I've worked with. For the most part, they're there to get better, and they absorb your knowledge to help them get better, and then you have that trust. And so, that was a lot of fun. I remember specifically Scott Niedermeyer. He came to us. I think he won 3 Stanley Cups at the time. And this is when I decided I wasn't going to do hang cleans anymore with my pro athletes. I was teaching Scott how to do hang cleans. And one, I appreciated the fact that he wasn't like, I don't want to do that. I don't know how to do that. It was teach me. And so I'm trying to teach him, and Scott couldn't get it. And so I got to a point, I'm like, okay, well, if arguably one of the best defensemen in the world who's won 3 Stanley Cups has never done this exercise before, and he could potentially get injured. I'm like, what am I doing? So I'm like, yeah, Scott, we're not going to do that. We're going to do that instead. And so I immediately just said, we're not doing cleans anymore. And so, I just, I remember that story because I appreciate the fact that he was at least willing to learn it. And yeah, you had guys like that made it a lot of fun.
Yeah, that I love. I love good stories about really how things kind of evolved. So
Mm.
getting back to kind of our common connection, Mike, you know, he and I spoke last time about this multiplier effect in regard to nature versus nurture, that the environment becomes a multiplier for the individual.
Hmm.
So the way he explained it, if you're if you're a 5, let's say from a skill or talent level athlete on a scale of 0 to 10, but the environment is a 10, the ethos that you're around is a 10, you become a 50. And if you're, you know, let's say again a 5, but the environment or the ethos is a 5, then you're a 25. And the point that he was basically trying to make was that you could be as skilled and as talented as you want to be, but if the environment is like a 1,
Mm-hmm.
you're only going to be a 10. You're not going to, you know, go to a 10 by 10 100 level. So I saw your interview with the coach from Arizona State.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's your take on that after kind of hearing what she had to say about, let's say, the environment?
I would agree 100%. Culture is everything. And I think it starts in the locker room.
Mm,
If you have good people who are willing to go to war with the guy next to them and care about the person next to him, that's a good thing. I want to say, like, in all those years, there was one season where, like, it just wasn't a good room. You had quality players, but there wasn't. It just wasn't a good room. I've seen that, and that kind of drive. I like that analogy. It drives down that number to help times the talent level. But I've also seen tens, with tens. I've seen hundreds. I've seen some pretty, really, really talented Hall of Fame players in a culture that breeds success, and that was fun to see. That's a good analogy. I like that.
yeah, I appreciated the the explanation because some people you know think that because their child or even high schooler is 6'4", whatever, um, that is a guarantee that they're going to play at a high level college
Hmm.
or they're going to play professionally.
Hmm.
And you know I don't think people truly understand how difficult it is to play professional sports. I don't think people fully understand what it takes to play at a Division 1 level.
Hmm. I would agree with that 100%. I've seen it. I've seen it with my own son. I've seen it with others. And yeah, there's a difference. You can't just There's a difference between showing up and then showing up with purpose, if that makes sense.
Tell me more
Day
about
in and
that.
day in and day in and day out, whether it's workouts, whether it's practice, being a good teammate, helping others, not taking days off when you don't need to. I think that is the difference, in my opinion.
So that kind of leads to my next question, which is talk to me about Bruce Boudreau's guts and glue.
That must have been in Washington because I don't know if I've ever heard that. I wasn't in the locker room a lot, but I mean, I don't, that's something Bruce would say for sure. For sure. Yeah,
Um,
I got to work with him as well in Anaheim and Minnesota. So great guy.
yeah. All right. So, uh, what are your thoughts and feelings around? So you had interviewed PJ Atherton, right? And he had mentioned this Swedish study on
Hmm.
long-term athletic development and how these top youth athletes didn't translate to professional levels.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts around that? What have your experiences been around, maybe not specifically that study, but that idea?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And you know what's crazy? I've seen kids quit a sport without knowing what they could be because it's burnout or they like to do something else, which is fine. But I've seen kids actually give up a sport that they're really talented in because maybe they feel like other kids at the same age are getting better opportunities when there's still a long ways to go. And when you keep grinding it and keep getting better, you never know what happens. Yeah, there are kids that, for example, who are phenomenal 14-year-olds that will make the NHL, but there's a lot more kids who weren't the best 14-year-olds that could make the NHL. Yeah.
I see this frequently, and not just at my own facility, but within um, my area, and also amongst where my kids play sports. Is that I currently have a 13, almost 14-year old, and a 15, almost 16-year old, and you know there are people that genuinely think at this point and this age, if they're not the best, if they're not quote unquote elite, that word in it of itself, like,
Hmm.
stands the very small amount of hair that I have left on my head up, that they're not going to go anywhere, that they're not going to be successful, that what's the point kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't get it either. There's still a long ways to go, and a lot can happen in that short amount of time. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just don't give up.
There was a couple episodes ago, I had interviewed a golf professional, actually out of Mass, and one of the things that he said was that, yes, similar to you, there, sometimes he sees these young, quote unquote phenoms who wind up going on and, doing some great things. But most of the time, the kids that are 13, 14, 15, 16, who are, quote unquote in the middle, or like upper middle pack, they're the ones that over the course of time will ultimately outplay the other golfers that were, let's say, early skilled,
Hmm.
because, you know, this kind of goes back to what Mike was talking about, the gift in average, because, the quote unquote average player, which was me, like, I had enough skill that I could play college hockey, but I didn't have enough skill that I was going to play professionally.
Hmm.
Um, but what allowed me to play college hockey was the gift and average, because I worked my tail off in the weight
Hmm.
room and doing anything and everything else to basically, average up, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's awesome because if you're lacking in one area, you can certainly make up for it in another through hard work and doing the right things. And that's when it comes down to consistency. It's consistently showing up, consistently working hard over and over and over again without that promise of, hey, you do this, you're going to make the NHL, for example. Like, no, you
Mm.
do it. That's in your nature because you love the game and you want to make sure that you do the best you can and find ways to make sure you're doing the best things that are possible to help you get to where you want to go.
Do you ever, or have you kept in touch with any of the ex players, like Korea?
No, I haven't talked to Paul in a while. I do talk to quite a few. I've had him on my show actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I'm not really in the NHL circle anymore. Like I'm still like friends with some guys in the wild on Instagram and all that, but no, I don't really call it people every day.
Well, I guess I asked because I'm curious to know, if someone like you had you gave the example of, that's Paul's equipment that, he brought in, and he was such a pivotal guy in supporting and rolling out this program. How he's doing now post,
Hmm.
career, you know, because at least my hope from an outsider, I used to watch Paul on TV playing for the University of Maine
Yeah.
a pro. And I don't know, I hope from a fellow hockey player standpoint and human standpoint that, like, he's kept up with the strength and conditioning. And
Oh, there's no question he is.
yeah,
I believe he surfs on a daily basis down in Southern California. He's still an athlete for sure.
yeah,
Absolutely. A lot of those guys are.
yeah.
Hmm.
All right, so here's a question for you. Would you
Yeah.
recommend someone be the top player? So this goes along the lines of, like, the gift and average that Mike was talking about in the last episode. Would you recommend someone be the top player on a lower team or the lower player on a top team?
Oh, definitely the first. Top player on the lower team.
Top player on a lower team.
Absolutely. You get more ice time, you get more puck touches. You're probably going to get more power play time, maybe trusted in penalty kill situations. Maybe you're the last guy on the ice when you need a goal. That's not going to happen if you're the lowest guy on the top team.
So
Sure, you might get more playing time when they have a big win, but are you really part of that win? And I see it all the time. I see it all the time in youth hockey, where I'm at right now. My younger son's team, a lot of kids, during the season got pulled up to the top team, and I'm like, and there was another kid on another team who said, "No, I'm going to stay right here." I'm like, that kid is going to be better off down the road. And so, but luckily for me, my son got to play more because those guys, those quote top guys, went to the next team up. And I think one of them was still one of the lowest kids on the team. I just think people chase that, I guess, that letter, meaning, in Minnesota hockey, it's A or B. You want to go from B to A. Like it shouldn't matter. It's where your child is at their development and maximizing the best case scenario.
all right, so what would be the flip side argument to that? Would there ever be a time when you would recommend or like the idea of someone being the lower player on a top team?
I mean, we all get to that situation where, for example, you're at high school, you're trying out for the high school varsity team. Maybe you become the fourth line player, and there's no other option. Like there's no other team you can play for at that point. So like maybe you're on the fourth line or you're the third pair defenseman. Like that might be your your peak, I guess. That's the only time I would recommend that.
Yeah. Well, I asked mainly because, Mike was talking about some of these guys at BU who were like first, second line players. They were first, second paired defensemen, and they had a really tough time playing in the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but there
Yeah.
were a lot of players that he could think of who were much more successful in the NHL, who were third, fourth line guys, the fifth through eighth defensemen, playing in the NHL.
Yeah, that happens as well because I think a lot of times maybe a coach in college has you pegged as a certain player. They believe in that. Okay, like this guy is a shutdown defenseman, has no offense to his game, or this guy is an offensive defenseman, has no defensive structure to his game. And someone else with I guess, a more outside opinion might see a different player than that coach sees him, and they might get an opportunity in the NHL. And that does happen. And sometimes the NHL game is easier for some of the guys that play college hockey. I've heard that as well. Like the NHL can be easier to play in because all the players are in the right position. It's a fast game. you know you're going to pass it to someone that's going to get on their tape and they're going to receive the pass. So that's the difference that I've heard over the years. And like the American Hockey League, the minor league team, the minor league for the NHL, like it's a different game than the NHL. And I think people find their roles and they get more comfortable. And I think that's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, for those that say outside the hockey world, I mean, there are a number of guys who legitimately make a career in the American Hockey League and have never stepped foot in the NHL, but they are career guys in the AHL and are fantastic.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
all right, so last question, because I want to respect your time here. The overall question is, where do you see the future of sports going? And I say that with respect that I believe the biggest issue that we face in long-term athletic development is this us versus them mentality of either my program is better than yours, my school overrides your club, my club overrides your school. It's this
Hmm.
battle as opposed to together. So how do we, first of all, where do you see it going, and then how or what would a recommendation be to help bridge the gap so it's not combative, it's actually development?
Yeah, I know what you're saying there. I was going to say what I think is happening is that, where I'm at in Minnesota, hockey is the king, right? And but baseball is also big, football is also big, lacrosse is also big. And what I see happening is that these seasons are overlapping one another. And so it's in hockey in the higher levels, it's crazy. Like you're dialed into your hockey team in your program. But your lacrosse, if you're in lacrosse, if you're any good at it, you're diehard into your lacrosse program as well. And then football, that's another beast. And then other sports, like when you're in baseball, you're expected to be at all the practices and all the games. And now baseball, like they start practicing in February indoors in Minnesota. Well, that's the heart of the hockey team, hockey season. So what happens is these kids kind of get, well, he's not really a baseball player. He just likes to play hockey, or he's not into lacrosse. He's just a hockey guy. And then, like that's what I see like factoring in the not helping development. It's getting tougher and tougher to play multiple sports.
Mm.
And that's what I see. But I know what you're saying as well. These programs competing for one another, making promises that they can't keep, like that. But then in those situations, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Do you want to be on the third line on the elite spring summer program, or do you want to be one of the top guys in another summer hockey program, which is another discussion as well, the spring and summer stuff. But yeah, it can, that's a big rabbit hole.
I think you bring up an a critical point, which is all of these start to overstretch themselves and they start overlapping.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
the notion of a multi-sport athlete becomes less and less. And you know is it driven by, is it being driven by the overall sport, or is it the club, is it the parent? I don't know. I think it's probably this conglomerate effect of
Yeah, I think it's a combination of FOMO, fear of missing out,
you know
and parents uneducated, like uneducated parents who think that, well, we need to go here because that's where so and so goes, or and that's what I love about my business is we have some parents who are willing to go the against the grain and, you know, train and not be on the ice as much. And they see themselves getting better when it's important, which is the hockey season, not in the spring and summer.
I had a little soccer workshop in my facility for coaches, parents, kids, this past Tuesday, and afterwards, this young kid, I think he was 13, came up and we were talking, and he was telling me the love that he has for the game of soccer, and I said, "That's awesome. Do you play any other sports?" And he said, "Yeah, I play basketball, I wrestle, I this," and I was like, "Man, that is such a breath of fresh air to hear."
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes, "But I'm thinking about stopping all of that because I just want to focus on soccer." And
Huh.
and I said, "Look, I have no skin in your game. This is the first time we've ever met. But if you could listen to anything I said, I can guarantee you, if we look back in X number of years and you continued to play basketball or you continued to wrestle and you didn't play soccer for as much, let's say for a certain amount of time, I guarantee you, you would be a better soccer player."
Yeah, 100%.
The look on his face was like Jim Belushi walking
Yeah,
down the stairs in Animal House listening to the guy playing the
yeah,
guitar.
no, yeah,
It's like
I
he
agree.
wanted to grab my guitar coach and just like shake me like a tree.
Yeah,
Uh, but I said, again, I have no skin in the game. Mom was standing next to him laughing. Um, and I said, take my word for it or don't, but I genuinely only want, the best for you. So
good
what
stuff.
just real quick, what would you say, or what would your recommendation be then to start combating against this overlap of sport, because it's kind of inevitable. So,
Hmm.
how do we start making some steps?
What I've seen is that the kids who are really good at any of them, they don't care. They're not like, okay, he's going to be back after the hockey season, then he'll start playing lacrosse, whatever. But I mean, it's tough. I'm not going to say pick less sports to play. Keep like I had a kid come in yesterday with his dad, and really good high end hockey player wants to train with us, and he's like, yeah, but he plays lacrosse and he plays football. I'm like, great, great. And from my end, I'm like, but you want to make sure you're training throughout all those seasons to prevent injuries from happening, and increase in performance. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's a situation that I don't know. There does become a time when specialization should occur, but I think if you're playing multiple sports, keep playing until you're burnt out from one of them, or you lose interest in one of them. I think, and that's okay. That's okay, because it is time consuming. I get that, and you know maybe you do want to focus on one as you get older, and maybe if you're any good at one of them versus the other, and there becomes a time when it's a time when, like, okay, I could get a college scholarship playing this sport. Maybe I should focus on that. That's okay too. The longer that you delay that, you're gonna be fine.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for those watching, please understand that Sean has a vast amount of information out there through his website, his various social media outlets on Instagram and Facebook, and those have all of his links in there. And one of the great things, I think, is uh the fact that you can legitimately be anywhere in the US and you have this online training portal for kids that want to integrate that training, like you said, throughout the year,
Mhm.
and you're providing access to that.
Yeah, sure. That's total hockey training. Yep.
So
Thank
I really appreciate your time today, Coach. I'm grateful for what you brought, and um, I'm excited for what you're going to continue to do up there in Minnesota.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I am too. Thank you.
Well,
Thanks for having me on.
it's my pleasure. Thank you.
All
All
right.
right.
Thanks.
Bye
Take
now.
care. Have a great one.
All right. Bye now.